Hello, everybody. Tara Baklund here. And as usual, we have an Herbs in Spanglish, but we're going to combine it with a series I've been doing on becoming an herbalist. It's going to be a fun combination. Entonces, hoy, en vez de solamente un episodio de Herbs in Spanglish, también vamos a platicar sobre cómo encontrar el camino o su camino de ser un herbalista. Entonces, vamos a empezar. I'm here again with Alberto Carbo, and we both have pretty unique paths, I would say, not necessarily the path in being herbalists, but still could be called herbalists. And so we're going to share our stories today. Estoy aquí hoy como siempre, con mi colega Alberto Carbo para discutir este sujeto. Vamos a empezar. Alberto, ¿qué quieres decir? What do you want to say, Alberto, in this long introduction?
No, pues hola, ¿cómo están? Hi, how are you? And welcome to another Herbs in Spanglish. And yeah, I think this was a great idea, Tara, to totally highlight or maybe appreciate two different paths and help us understand that all paths are different, but we can all we can get a lot from recognizing what path we're on and what part of the path we may be on. Entonces, que nuestras historias ojalá sirvan como perspectiva, y lo importante es que no importa en qué camino uno se encuentre, si uno puede darse cuenta del lugar en el que va o la dirección en la que quiere ir, puede ser beneficioso.
Mm-hmm. And so I, in particular, I don't normally call myself an herbalist in the sense that I don't do consultations and that sort of thing. But as our colleague and teacher, Phyllis D. Light, says, you don't have to know 25 herbs to be an herbalist. But if you know how to use one herb 25 ways, you can call yourself an herbalist. And Matt agrees with that, our other teacher, Matthew Wood. Entonces, yo no soy herbalista como el herbalista típico, como yo doy consejos todos los días. Yo no tengo un trabajo así. Como lo ves, estoy aquí en la internet trabajando en los sitios, hacer los sitios, educación, todo esto. Pero como dije, nuestra maestra y también colega, Phyllis D. Light, y Matthew Wood también, nuestro maestro, dicen maestro, ¿sí?
Uh-huh.
Diga también que para ser herbalista no tienes que saber o conocer 25 hierbas, pero si conoces una hierba y sabes trabajar o usar trabajar con o usar una hierba en 25 maneras, puedes ser herbalista. So that's why we're here today, to say that there are many ways to be an herbalist and to help you see your path, hopefully, that no matter where you are on the path of being, quote, an herbalist. Entonces, este episodio, como los otros de Becoming an Herbalist, es para ayudarte a ver dónde estás en su camino y que mismo si sientes que no estás en el camino de ser un herbalista, estás en el camino y cada paso es importante. So we're going to share our stories. Alberto actually does consultations as well as working with us in these education sites. Alberto es un herbalista que doy, do you say gives, dar?
Hace
Consejos?
Consultas.
Oh my gosh, there's so many words that are so close. Pero también trabaja con nosotros en hacer sitios o en varias maneras en los sitios web para ayudar dar educación de herbalismo. I hope that was close enough.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and to add to the herbalist path, so I loved seeing the interview that Matthew Wood did with Anna Rosa Robertsdottir from Iceland, and she only uses 14 herbs because those are the ones that are in abundance in Iceland. So it's not, 14 herbs is not a lot, but all to hear her talk about all of the things she does with them was amazing. And it gives you perspective that, yeah, you don't need, so many herbs. They are all useful in many different ways. Para ponerle énfasis a lo que dijo Tara sobre el camino del herborista, si tienen tiempo, véanse el episodio de Matthew Wood entrevistando a Ana Rosa Robertsdottir, que es de Islandia, y por la temporada corta de crecimiento allá, solo ella trabaja con 14 hierbas solamente. Y es un testamento a la posibilidad de trabajar con pocas hierbas si uno las conoce muy bien.
I forgot what I was going to say. I was looking for the interview to put in the chat. Maybe I'll have to remember to do that later. I will do that later. Más tarde voy a poner el enlace en los comentarios de esta entrevista. So what I wanted to ask is, you had traveled a lot through South America and even into the Amazon. I remember you saying that there are shamans or herbalists as well there that only work with one herb and could do amazing things. Is that true? Has viajado bastante por la América del Sur, o Suramérica, dicen, sí. Y especialmente por las Amazonias, y han herbalistas en las Amazonias que trabajan solamente con una hierba, ¿verdad? Oh, you're on mute. Estás mudo.
Es interesante porque hay en las Amazonas, al igual que en todas las Américas, ha habido mucha pérdida de conocimiento por las medicinas naturales y la práctica de usar plantas como medicinas. There's been, what's curious is that in the Amazon, but also all over the Americas, there's been a lot of loss of knowledge in regards to plant medicines and working with natural ways. Entonces, sí conocí a alguien que trabajaba que tenían muy poco conocimiento. No diría que solo conocían una hierba, pero conocían pocas. No, o sea, por ponerle un número 5, digamos, o sea, menos de 10. Y trabajaban con esas hierbas, pero estaban tratando de conectarse con sus raíces y aprender más. There were people that I met that, due to this loss of knowledge, they didn't know a whole lot of herbs, but they knew a handful. I wouldn't say just one, but they knew a handful of herbs, and they used them, and they were constantly trying to rekindle their roots and get in touch with their roots and understand more about the herbal medicines available to them, because there's so many. Oh, you're on mute now.
There you go. So how about your story? Was it in those travels that I mean, had you always grown up around herbalism? Was it in those travels that you came to herbalism, or when did herbs come into your life? Entonces, ¿fue criado con herbalismo o fue cuando estabas viajando por Sudamérica, o cuando las hierbas entraron en su vida?
Pues el herborismo, no, yo no crecí con el herborismo. Crecí en la ciudad, en Bogotá, Colombia, una ciudad grande, y con la medicina moderna. I did not grow up with herbalism. I grew up in Bogota, Colombia, a big, large city, and with conventional or modern day medicine. But I would say that herbs, I think my curiosity led me to herbs due to personal health issues. So I was born with hemophilia, which is a bleeding disorder. And so I do use conventional medicine every, a few times a week to maintain. And for those that are not familiar, hemophilia is a bleeding disorder. You essentially cannot stop bleeding as efficiently as someone that doesn't have hemophilia. So it takes me longer to stop bleeding, which can, of course, be dangerous. And so I take medication for that. Yo crecí con hemofilia, nací con hemofilia. Para los que no saben, es una condición hereditaria que afecta la sangre y donde afecta especialmente la eficacia de coagulación. Entonces, si yo sangro por más tiempo, se demora más en parar el sangrado, lo cual es peligroso. Y bueno, por esto yo desde que tenía 10, 11 años, estaba buscando alternativas o buscando formas de apoyar mi salud, formas no siempre naturales, pero formas diferentes de apoyar mi salud. And so, yeah, since I was like probably 10 or 11, I was always constantly looking for different ways that I could support my health that were different than the approach that I was getting from the hematologists and doctors, which is I'm very appreciative for. It's the medicine I take has saved my life many times. Like hemophiliacs before would probably not have a long life expectancy. So and with the amount of accidents I've had, I know I probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the conventional medicine. So it's I'm very appreciative and thankful for it. En el pasado, la gente con hemofilia no vivían mucho tiempo y considerando los accidentes que yo he tenido, yo creo que yo probablemente no hubiera sobrevivido tampoco. Entonces estoy muy agradecido por la medicina convencional que uso. But what I think sparked the curiosity was that there were no, aside from the conventional medicine that I take for hemophilia, there was nothing else. I was very curious. I was constantly asking questions like, how can I support my health or support clotting and bleeding or good quality of blood, even though I didn't have those words at that time, but just kind of like asking questions like, is there anything I can do to my diet or, change my diet in any way to support my health? And the answers were always very much not kind of, there wasn't a lot of depth. It was kind of like, yeah, you could try, but there's no research or there's no indications that any of that would help. That was always kind of there wasn't much confidence or encouragement to venture. Entonces no había mucho. Yo siempre curioso preguntaba cómo más puedo apoyar mi salud, tal vez cambiando la dieta, tal vez haciendo cosas diferentes, pero las respuestas siempre eran no apoyaban mi curiosidad, sino que eran más respuestas como, bueno, puedes intentar, pero no hay estudios, no hay nada que demuestre que eso podría ayudar. And so, of course, I started just trying out different things, reading about alternative ways of supporting your health. And so that led me to Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine. and reading a lot about their history and slowly understanding that they were these vast, very complex systems of healthcare that have been around for thousands of years. And while I still didn't know how that could help me, I couldn't get enough. I just, it was so interesting. It just kept fueling a spark of curiosity and just wanting to know more. Entonces, a través de eso encontré pues primero la Ayurveda, que es la medicina ancestral de India, y la medicina tradicional china. Y pues seguía leyendo y aprendiendo, y aunque no necesariamente aprendía cosas que no necesariamente apoyaban mi salud, pero estaba aprendiendo mucho sobre estas culturas y estos sistemas de medicina antiguos que llevan miles de años, y mi curiosidad cada vez crecía más y más. Yeah, so that's how I would say herbs first came into my life. Of course, once you start reading about Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine, you start learning about herbs a little bit. So that's where the first signs of herbal medicine kind of it's when the first when I first kind of understood that, okay, well, these systems used herbs primarily, so maybe there's something there worth exploring further. Esas fueron las primeras veces que entendí, bueno, estos sistemas antiguos usan hierbas, y entonces tal vez hay algo ahí que tengo que explorar más. And yeah, eventually my reading brought me back to the Americas and to something which is more close to my culture, because Chinese medicine, TCM and Ayurveda, they're kind of exotic in a way for people in North America. They're from faraway lands, and there's a whole cosmology and philosophy around those cultures. So there's appeal to that, other than just wanting to know about herbs. But when I found out about ayahuasca and just reading about it online, growing up, I'd heard of it. In Colombia, they call it yahe. So I had heard of it, but it was never something that was popular or that was promoted in any way by people in the circles I grew up in. Entonces, sí, eventualmente, leyendo sobre cosas diferentes en el internet, encontré información sobre la ayahuasca, y esto como que me centró otra vez en algo más parecido, más familiar a mi cultura, porque pues claro, la Ayurveda y la medicina china pueden ser un poco exóticas y tienen sus propias filosofías, historias que son de tierras lejanas. Entonces, cuando empecé a aprender sobre la ayahuasca, nomás leyendo por el internet, la curiosidad se abrió más, porque era algo más familiar y algo que, aunque nunca había nadie cerca a mí en mi familia o amigos tenían experiencia con ayahuasca, sí es algo que había escuchado y que sabía que existía. Entonces abrió una puerta familiar. And yeah, so then I just started reading about ayahuasca. But that's if that answers your question. I think that was a long answer, but pretty much personal interest.
Well, I think it's a good point that, the path to herbalism, or wherever you are, is not a straight path. There are a lot of curves. There are a lot of different routes to take. And so, well, yeah, it was a long answer, but I think it emphasizes that point. Entonces, yo creo que es tu respuesta larga. Es un ejemplo para decir que el camino al ser herbalista no es una camino estrecha.
Recto.
Pero tiene muchas curvas y otros caminos que puedes tomar o encontrar también. Entonces, yo creo que es perfecto. Pero hay mucho más. I know there's a lot more to this. But I have to ask, yo tengo que preguntar, ¿cuál eran las hierbas o otras cosas que ayudaron más con la hemofilia? What were the herbs and other things that helped most with your hemophilia?
Yeah, well, at first, so I became intrigued with TCM and Ayurveda and reading a lot about them, but before I got into any of the herbs, I just wanted to understand, how does this work? I had no idea, and I didn't really even, like, that was when I first started kind of realizing, oh, there's a holistic perspective to these traditions, which is different than our modern day traditions. So a lot of it at first was wrapping my mind around, like, okay, what is holistic, and what paying attention to and noticing that these traditions take into account the whole body, and emotions, and everything that's going on with a person. So I wasn't even getting into herbs. I was just kind of understanding, like, okay, yes, and exploring my own issues through that lens. So instead of just thinking, like, oh, I have a genetically inherited bleeding disorder, like, okay, well, how does that make me feel, and how can I improve the way I feel about it? And so not even looking at herbs, but just understanding that there was more to my life experience than just symptoms, but that there was a whole kind of that it affects me on a whole level. And so and that took years to really sink in and understand. Sí, al principio no, las hierbas ni siquiera estaba leyendo sobre las hierbas, estaba más leyendo sobre la filosofía de estas tradiciones, y empezando a entender que estas dos tradiciones en particular se acercan a la salud de una perspectiva holística. Entonces toman en consideración todos los aspectos de una persona, incluyendo las emociones. Y entonces empecé poco a poco a entender que la hemofilia no solo es algo que me afecta físicamente, entonces empezar a ver mi condición de una forma más holística, de una forma más, y empezando a tratar de cambiar la perspectiva, mi propia perspectiva hacia eso. Yeah, so herbs were not even really, because I didn't understand anything about herbs. I just, I did read some about them, but I didn't know how to use them, where to find them. So it was, to me, that was kind of off limits. At first, it just seemed so, it seemed like I would be irresponsible for trying. Entonces, sí, al principio parecía que tal vez sería irresponsable para mí de probar, por lo que no conocía nada sobre las hierbas y no las entendía para nada.
Yo creo que es un otro episodio de cómo más o menos trataste de su hemofilia. It sounds like it probably is a whole other episode to talk about how you're currently treating your hemophilia, for those who I'm sure really want to know. But a similar question, because usually I go like in a linear order when we're doing these interviews with becoming an herbalist, but I think there's some interesting stops that if I don't ask the question, people will be like, oh my God, I want to know. Entonces, normalmente en las entrevistas yo voy a preguntar las preguntas en una forma más lineal, pero hay unas cosas como hemofilia, preguntas sobre esto y ayahuasca. Si no, yo no les pregunto, yo creo que unas personas van a preguntar a mí, ¿por qué no preguntaste? So how important, or what role did ayahuasca play in your path to becoming an herbalist? ¿Cuál era el papel de ayahuasca en tu vida, en su camino de ser herbalista?
Sí, pues primero fue fundamental. It was foundational, absolutely. Al principio solo leí sobre la ayahuasca, entonces abrió la curiosidad de una medicina ancestral, se ha usado por miles de años, no sabemos cuánto tiempo. Y
Pero no fuiste a Sudamérica buscando ayahuasca, ¿sí?
sí, entonces, pues entonces embarqué en un viaje con mi esposa en Sudamérica y una de mis metas era probar ayahuasca. And so after finding this out about ayahuasca and reading about it for a couple of years, probably, my wife and I embarked on a backpacking trip through South America. We started in Colombia and we traveled for 2.5 years in total. But one of the goals at the onset of the trip was to find ayahuasca. And soon I realized that it had become popular, and I knew this just through the internet. But being in South America, especially in Peru and Colombia, Ecuador as well, but especially in Peru, there are many people who offer you ayahuasca at the plaza, at the bus stop, at any tourist place. Really, there's a lot of, hey, you want to do an ayahuasca session? It's this much. And all of that seemed kind of commercial and not, it didn't appeal to me. Even though it was one of my goals, there was something about that just didn't feel right. Entonces, en Colombia, en Ecuador pasa esto, pero en Perú más que todo te ofrecen ayahuasca al bajarte del bus, en la plaza, en cualquier lugar turístico. Y aunque era una meta de probar la ayahuasca en el viaje, y a pesar de que me lo ofrecían a menudo, no se sentía muy bien la oferta, se sentía un poco comercial. So we just kept traveling, and we eventually stumbled upon a place called Dos Mundos. It's called Dos Mundos. We stumbled upon a place called Dos Mundos, and that's a whole story on its own, but a whole series of coincidences that happened, and we stumbled upon this place. And the curandero there, whose name is Pepe, he does a full dieta. And dieta, for those that are not familiar, is reduced calorie consumption. So that the idea behind it is that in consuming less calories, your stomach is less focused on digestion and can help the plants go deeper. The ayahuasca as well as other plants. And so he works with ayahuasca and other plants. Entonces, bueno, a través de una serie de coincidencias, que es otra historia completa, conocimos a un señor llamado Pepe Ordóñez, y tiene un centro de salud integral llamado Dos Mundos. Y llegamos allá y él recomienda una dieta, y para los que no son familiares, la dieta consiste de una reducción en calorías, y la idea es que al no estar digiriendo el sistema digestivo, las plantas pueden entrar más profundo al cuerpo, y él trabaja con ayahuasca y otras plantas. And yeah, and to make the answer not so long, I would say that it helped in so the most physical improvement after drinking ayahuasca was nosebleeds. I had nosebleeds every day my whole life, since as far as I can remember, and they were pretty bad. I would sometimes swallow blood for 2 or 3 hours a day, and that was just my everyday reality. But ever since I drank ayahuasca for the first time, my nose hasn't bled since then. So that alone to me is amazing, and it highly improved my quality of life. And that's just the one thing that it did. La cosa, digamos, principal, lo más evidente física que con la cual la ayahuasca me ayudó fue que frenó o paró los sangrados de nariz. A mí me sangraba la nariz todos los días, y hay veces 2, 3, 4 horas seguidas, y yo simplemente tragaba la sangre para poder continuar con mi vida. Y después de tomar ayahuasca una vez, mi nariz no ha vuelto a sangrar. Entonces, solo con eso fue una ayuda tremenda y mejoró mi calidad de vida astronómicamente. Yeah, so that was, yeah, besides that, it opened my mind to the possibility that plants have very powerful medicine, which is, I think, a concept that I was already open to. I was already maybe accepting of, but I lived it. And so it was like from that moment on, I knew like, wow, like plants are incredibly powerful medicines or substances that we can use as medicine. So from that point on, even though I still didn't know the word herbalist in English. And I didn't know that there were people who practiced herbalism in North America or in, quote unquote, the Western civilized world. But from that moment on, I understood on a visceral level that, yeah, herbs or plants are powerful substances and they're great as medicine. Sí, la otra cosa es que desde ese momento entendí visceralmente que las plantas son sustancias poderosas que podemos usar como medicina, aunque todavía no conocía la palabra herborismo o sabía que había gente que practicaba herborismo todavía en esta época tan avanzada, digamos, o tan avanzada. Y después de eso ya entendí que las plantas son una medicina increíble, y son sustancias muy poderosas que podemos usar para ayudarnos o apoyar nuestra salud.
Yo recuerdo una historia también que tuya, que en este viaje tuviste una otra experiencia con las hierbas o con una hierba que es de lo que yo recuerdo salvó tu vida. And so I remember another story, and not that you have to tell the whole story, but I think it's like another definitive moment that there was another herb that basically saved your life.
Yeah, I don't know if my life was at risk that time, but my leg was. I had a huge hemorrhage in my leg. And it was really neat because I didn't even understand how cool it was, what happened, until years later when I studied herbalism. And to make the story brief, I had a big leg hemorrhage in the back of my thigh, and it wasn't stopping for many days. And my wife, I was essentially bedridden and delirious, and my wife was bringing me ice from the market multiple times a day, big bags of ice. But in the nighttime, there was no ice. So from one of the things that we had learned about at Dos Mundos, that place where we tried ayahuasca and other Amazonic plants, we learned how to use malba. And malba in English is mallow. So from the marshmallow family. And this is not a plant that would be typically used for hemorrhages, or for, it's not one that you see as one that's used for hemorrhages, but it's the only one we knew, I guess, at that point. And in the nighttime, I would take the leaves soaked in water and put them on my leg. And I could feel them pulling the heat out of my leg. My leg was so hot, and they were so cooling, and I could feel them just pulling heat out of my leg. And I really think they help to essentially stop the bleeding. Entonces fue en Perú y tuve una hemorragia en mi pierna, en mi muslo, y no paraba de sangrar por varios días, y aunque no creo que estaba a riesgo de perder mi vida, pero sí en riesgo de perder mi pierna. Y habíamos aprendido en 2 mundos, con Pepe habíamos aprendido a usar la malva, que se usa en el herborismo occidental y se conoce como marshmallow. Y en el día mi esposa me traía hielo del mercado, bolsas así gigantes que las ponía en mi pierna y se derretían rápido. O sea, mi pierna estaba súper caliente y en la noche no tenía hielo, pero decidimos usar las hojas de malva remojadas en agua y ponerlas en mi pierna, y yo sentía como sacaba el calor de mi pierna, y yo creo que eso ayudó, yo creo que me salvó la pierna.
Estoy buscando el Herbs in Spanglish de Malva. I'm looking for the Herbs in Spanglish Malva or marshmallow because the entire story is in there, which is really captivating. La historia entera es en este episodio y yo creo que Alberto está buscándolo también. But we'll find that and we'll put that in the comments because it's really a wonderful story, pretty amazing. And this is pretty common among people who enter into herbalism is they have there's the healer's journey, right? The healer's, what is it? Yeah. Is that what it's called? It's
The wounded healer.
The wounded healer. Yes. How would you say that?
Nunca he tratado de decir eso en español.
Yeah. Entonces, esta historia tu historia es muy impresionante, es muy interesante, pero también es común de una manera para los que vuelven a ser herbolistas, porque es normalmente un caso así que tiene un problema muy, muy grave para la persona y la medicina typical no tiene soluciones. So there's usually not a solution in our typical allopathic medicine, and the herbs are what really helps. And so likely if you're listening to that, you've probably had an experience like this already. And so the other thing, so when you got back from your travels, was it in your mind right away, like, I need to learn more about herbs, I need to or how did it take off from there? Entonces, cuando regresaron al Canadá, ¿qué pasó? ¿Estabas buscando clases o qué hiciste? Porque cada camino es diferente.
Sí, digamos que hubieron distracciones. Pues primero que todo, tenía que trabajar, no teníamos plata. Entonces, lo primero fue volver, yo antes de ser herborista trabajaba en restaurantes. Entonces volví a trabajar en restaurantes. Y lo curioso es que yo creo que no imaginaba que hubiera algo como lo que experimenté o lo que viví en la selva amazónica. Creo que, o sea, de alguna manera yo pensaba que eso solo existía allá. So came back from traveling, needed money, so went back to the restaurant industry. That's where my career was, I guess, before becoming an herbalist. And so I just went back to the restaurant industry, and it never even crossed my mind to study herbs or anything like that, because in a way it's almost like I thought I was under the impression that only existed in the jungle. I had no idea. In probably a quick internet search, I could have found something, but it didn't even occur to me to look. I'd never heard of it. I thought it was a thing of the past in the modern world. Yo pensaba que era algo del pasado, algo ya, digamos, extinto en el mundo moderno. And so a few years went by working in restaurants. Luckily, I got a job in a restaurant where I was also managing a garden. So I was connecting with plants in that way. And I'd been gardening before that and throughout my travels. And I knew I really enjoyed that. I definitely think that was enhanced after my experiences in the jungle, in which I just enjoyed connecting with plants probably more than I did before. Me conseguí un trabajo en un restaurante donde también manejaba un jardín para el restaurante, y eso creo que ayudó mucho, y poco a poco entendí que gracias a las experiencias en la selva apreciaba mi conexión con las plantas mucho más. Entonces, para, digamos, acortar la historia, después de un buen rato, de como 2 o 3 años, fue cuando nació mi hijo, y yo en ese momento ya venía pensando en otras opciones de trabajo, porque trabajar en un restaurante con una familia no siempre es lo más conveniente debido a los horarios de restaurante. Entonces yo ya estaba pensando en una solución, una alternativa, y preciso nació mi hijo, y yo encontré en una tienda local, encontré un libro sobre herborismo, y lo empecé a leer, y fue increíble porque me di cuenta que el herborismo todavía existe en Norteamérica. Yo no lo podía creer. Y entonces me puse a buscar, y la herborista que escribió ese libro, Abra Arneson, ella practica acá en Ottawa, donde vivo yo. Entonces yo no podía creerlo. And so right when my son was born, I'd recently been to a local bookstore, and I bought a book about herbalism, and I was just reading this book, and I could not believe that I was reading this. I was like, wow, this is what I saw in the jungle. But it actually exists in North America, and here's a whole book about it. I was so excited. And then I realized that the herbalist, Abra Arneson, who wrote the book, lived in Ottawa and practiced in Ottawa. And so I started looking up herbalism programs in my area, and there's not many in person. And hers was one of them. So I called her and talked to her on the phone, and I decided to apprentice with her. She runs a 3-year apprenticeship, and you can always find out about it at abraherbs.com. She has an in-person 3-year apprenticeship, and after talking to her, I enrolled right away. And that's it. That's it. Entonces apenas descubrí eso, y yo ya empecé a buscar programas de herborismo. Aprendí la palabra herborismo, entonces pude buscar en el internet dónde puedo aprender herborismo, y no habían muchas opciones, pero una de las opciones era el colegio de Abra. La puedes encontrar en abraherbs.com, y ella tiene un programa, un aprendizaje de herborismo de 3 años en persona, y me apunté inmediatamente. Oh, you're on mute.
Y en esta época ya sabías que quería dar consultas de herbalismo, o no solamente sabía que quería trabajar en herbalismo. So did you know from the start that you wanted to do herbal consultations, or did you just know that you wanted to be in herbalism and just enrolled?
Yeah, I don't think I knew, and in a way, I think I kind of put that aside. Like, I think the whole taking clients was daunting. It was kind of scary, right? Because it's and it's something I'd never done, right? I'd been working in restaurants, and I'd been working in cooking and bartending, so I definitely had people skills, but not. I didn't think when I thought of it was too much. It was so I kind of put that aside, and I was very much interested in learning it for myself. But as I got more into the apprenticeship, I realized that that I did want to do that, and that I could, because I saw the value in herbs for myself. I figured if I can help other people with herbs or with plants, then I think I would want to do that. And of course, having the support in the apprenticeship to learn how to take a consultation helped to make that less daunting.
Yeah.
Sí. Entonces, no, creo que al principio era muy em, pensar en hacer una consulta con alguien era algo como casi miedoso, porque no tenía ni idea cómo hacerlo. O sea, trabajando en restaurantes como cocinero, como bartender, tenía contacto con personas y soy una persona muy social, pero ese hecho de tomar a alguien como un cliente, como que me daba nervios. Pero poco a poco me di cuenta que sí quería, porque entendía el valor que las hierbas y que las plantas aportaron a mi salud, y pensé, pues, si puedo ayudar a otras personas a conectarse con las plantas para que reciban la misma ayuda, ¿por qué no? Y pues en mi aprendizaje de herborismo nos dieron las herramientas para poco a poco poder tomar una consulta.
Entonces, ¿cómo llegaste a trabajar en un negocio de internet? Entonces, how did you end up then working with a company, an online education company in herbalism, of course?
Yeah, well, I just graduated from my apprenticeship, and I opened up my herbalism practice. And as with any business, it takes time to grow. I have at that time a son, and then I had a second child on the way. So as a parent, you can't just take your time to make your business grow. You have to pay bills. So I was looking for other work, and I because it was at the time of COVID as well. So I didn't want to go back to the restaurant industry, not only because I had been trying to change that up for a more family oriented schedule, but also because from COVID, the restaurants were no longer as reliable of a working environment as they had always been. So I was looking for more administrative jobs, and I didn't like anything that I was seeing. And then I had subscribed to the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism newsletter a couple months before. I never knew. I'd read Matthew's books, and throughout my studies, through my apprenticeship, but I had no idea that he had a website. So when I found Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism.com, right away I subscribed to the newsletter, and so I received an email newsletter that said we're hiring, and so I applied right away. Entonces me acaba de graduar de mi aprendizaje, mi práctica ya estaba, mi negocio, mi práctica privada de herborismo ya estaba funcionando, pero como todos los negocios se demoran en crecer, y siendo un papá o padre con un hijo y otro bebé en camino, necesitábamos ingresos, y estaba buscando trabajos, pero los restaurantes ya no eran una opción viable, no solo por los horarios, sino también porque era durante COVID y ya no representaban una fuente de ingresos tan sólido, o sea, en algo que podía contar siempre porque los podían cerrar en cualquier momento. Entonces estaba buscando trabajos administrativos y no me gustaban ninguna de las opciones. Pero a pesar de que leí los cuentos de Matthew a través de mi aprendizaje, no tenía idea que él tenía una página web, y apenas encontré el matthewinstituteofherbalism.com, me suscribí a al newsletter y recibí un newsletter que decía que estaban buscando gente. Entonces apliqué y menos mal, pues me llamaron para una entrevista y después el resto es historia. Luckily I applied and I was contacted for an interview, and then the rest is history.
Yo recuerdo de que dijiste que tu maestra Abra dijo que en cuanto se está tratando de crecer tu práctica, buscas un trabajo más estable y vas a crecer poco a poco, o mucho, quién sabe, su práctica. And I remember you said that your teacher, Abra, gave you, I think, great advice. While your practice is growing, find a stable job. That's my cat running on her wheel. Find a stable job, something more regular as your practice is growing.
Yeah, she definitely told me that. And yeah, I didn't think I would get a job in herbalism, because when I was apprenticing, herbalism is it's growing 100%, but it's so small, and so there's not a lot of jobs in herbalism aside from having your own practice, or working at an herb store, or there's not it. I guess I never considered it to be a possibility, but I'm very glad that I was able to connect with you and Matthew and the Institute of Herbalism, and and to, I guess, find this part of the path where I'm working, but it's still to do with herbs and whatnot. I feel very lucky.
And you can learn a lot. I mean, you are involved in all the classes in one way or another. I mean, you've just got to be learning a ton each day. I mean, you already know a lot, but just the opportunity to learn, de tener la oportunidad de aprender todos los días en tu trabajo también, y al mismo tiempo crecer tu negocio o tu práctica, es muy buena suerte. It's really good luck.
Yeah, it really is. Es muy buena suerte, pero creo que hablando del camino, creo que cada uno de nosotros, si nos podemos sintonizar con lo que es importante para nosotros, sea lo que sea, y tomar pasos en nuestra vida que en la dirección de esa meta o ese deseo, poco a poco las circunstancias se van dando que permiten que sigas por ese camino. I think it's important to emphasize that, talking about the path, no matter what you're into or what you do or what you want to do, it's the important part is to understand where you want to go, understand what you want to do, and then make some steps towards that direction. And then doors start to open, and paths start to open that support you in walking that path. And then you can just continue to do that.
Mm-hmm. One of the big questions as people are thinking about or trying to start their own practice is how to gain customers or clients, and how have you been able to do this to this point? Entonces gran pregunta de las personas que están tratando de crecer su práctica o quieren empezar una práctica de herbalismo es cómo encontrar los clientes. Entonces, ¿cómo haces esto tú?
Sí, por ahora todo ha sido a través de la palabra. Gracias al aprendizaje que hice con Abra cuando me gradué, los clientes que tuve en clínica durante el tercer año del aprendizaje, les di la opción, tenían la opción de continuar conmigo, y casi todos dijeron que sí, y de ahí me han recomendado. Entonces, por ahora, simplemente por la palabra, for now, it's been word of mouth. I was lucky that in the apprenticeship I did, the clients that I had for student clinic in the third year, I let them know I was graduating and that they could stay on with me if they wanted to. The majority did want to, and so that was a great way to, graduate and feel like I'm not lost. Graduate and feel like, okay, I'm still continuing this that was already started. And then they've referred different people to me, and referrals from family and friends, and that's mainly it, referrals.
Mm-hmm.
And I just to add to that it can be worrying as a new herbalist, like, where do I find clients? But they'll come. Like, once you start talking to people, you start telling people, that people will absolutely come your way, and it may be the people that you least expect that will be open to that possibility, or that to a consultation, and trying something new. Entonces, puede ser preocupante para un nuevo arborista de pensar en de dónde vienen los clientes, pero van a llegar, y a medida que vas empezando a hablar y conectarte con la gente y contarle a la gente sobre lo que haces, la gente se interesa. Entonces, no hay que confiar tal vez un poco en que eso va a pasar. I guess it's having a bit of trust that will happen.
It certainly is. How about in conclusion? I haven't done this yet with any other interviews, because I think this just came to mind. Esta idea entró en mi cabeza ahora mismo. Para concluir, vamos a discutir or brainstorm. What would you say for brainstorm? Is it a direct translation, or does it have its own phrase?
Discutir, sí, discutir.
Ideas sobre otros trabajos o negocios en cómo usar el herbalismo. So what are some other jobs or businesses that we've seen or can imagine? Because in our work, we encounter a lot of people and doing all sorts of things. So maybe in conclusion, let's just name off some ways that we've seen people using herbalism professionally and personally as kind of a given. So recently, for example, I'm going to grab it real quick. Actually, there's a woman in California, and she just sent me some samples, so I'm going to give her some props here. Una mujer en California me dio unos, how would you say, samples?
Unas muestras.
Muestras, gracias, de sus productos, pero son productos del mar. And so she collects seaweed, and so she's using her herbalism, but she has like a farm apparently on the sea. Tiene una, no es hacienda, pero
una finca.
Una finca, gracias, del mar, más o menos. Mismo en inglés no es común decir esto. Entonces, esto es una manera. Ella hace productos de hierbas también, pero voy a buscar uno rápido. Puedes,
Claro.
so go ahead and say a few more while I'm gone. I'll be right back.
Yeah, I think, and back to the way, knowing your path is, if you like herbs and if you like plants and medicinal herbs, specifically, there's so many ways to go. And yeah, having an apothecary is one of them. So, you'd want to know about how herbs can help the body. You'd want to know about the different plants, how to identify them. You'd want to know essentially everything that a clinical herbalist knows, but you wouldn't necessarily be taking on clients. You wouldn't be focused on taking on clients, but rather making medicine, plant medicines that you could sell to, either probably primarily other herbalists, or the general public. Entonces, hablando de los caminos de herborismo y la gente, si te gustan las plantas y específicamente las plantas medicinales, hay muchos caminos y uno de los ejemplos, es tener un apotecario. Entonces, un apotecario involucra el conocimiento sobre las plantas, identificarlas bien o correctamente, y cómo prepararlas y para qué funcionan o cómo ayudan el cuerpo. Entonces, básicamente todo lo que conoce un herborista clínico, con la diferencia de que uno no toma clientes, sino que prepara las medicinas fitoterapéuticas y las venden probablemente primariamente a otros herboristas o al público en general.
Y no tienes que hacer productos de todas las hierbas, no tienes que vender o hacer productos de 50 hierbas, puede ser solamente 5 que eres una especialista en unas hierbas específicas o que crecen in su hogar. So you don't have to have an apothecary or sell products of 50 products. That could be overwhelming, but you could specialize in, let's say, 5 products or something that's really more specific to you. So I'll show, for example, por ejemplo, estas muestras que recibí. Dana, que tiene una finca al lado del mar, yo imagino que ella collect or harvest. Is it? I don't want to say the wrong word, so I'm going to ask you.
Cosecha.
Cosecha, gracias. Ella cosecha seaweed.
Algas.
Algas, gracias. Del mar. Entonces, she's a specialist. Es especialista. Entonces, también tiene productos de rose hips, un aceite y también té. And so she has a few specific products, or she makes this sesame seaweed salt. And so she's specializing, she's working in her main product into a combination, something more that she specializes in. Entonces, como ella es especialista, se llama Donna, tiene un producto también de sal, que es de alga, sal y yo creo que sesame, ¿sí? Sesame.
Ajonjolí.
Ajonjolí. Gracias. I'll have to put that one on my flashcards. And rose hips, un aceite de, I don't know how you say rose hips.
Rosa mosqueta.
Rosa mosqueta. Gracias. So puede ser especialista de productos de piel. You could make skin products. There's a lot of people that do that, but you may be a special condition, so maybe you've cured your rosacea and you know what products helped you, and so you maybe specialize in skincare for rosacea. Entonces puede ser productos también que eres especialista en productos para la piel, pero no en general, a lo mejor para una condición que trataste en su piel, por ejemplo, rosácea. Gracias, estoy aprendiendo muchas palabras hoy. So, okay, just in the last few minutes, because we've gone a long time here. I would imagine also there, like you said, a shop, una tienda, claro, es simple. si tiene una tienda online, a lo mejor puedes trabajar en un hogar así. There's so many. Maybe
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, there's so many. It's true. There's endless options, and one thing that I think is important to remember is that herbalism did almost disappear in the modern world, but it's coming back. And so the possibilities of what you can do with herbalism are endless, in my opinion. And as more people start to rekindle that relationship with herbs, new that people will come up with new, unique ways of using that connection with plants and making it their living, or making a living out of using plants. Es importante también saber que el herborismo en el mundo moderno casi se desaparece, pero está volviendo, y entonces las posibilidades para trabajar con las plantas son interminables, en mi opinión, y poco a poco vamos a ver gente que empieza a usar plantas de formas diferentes, y arma negocios alrededor de eso. Like you could make a business just out of foraged teas, like foraging different herbs and making teas. You could write about it, of course, the education field. There is so much. Hay tantas opciones.
I was just thinking, like, even someone who would help you find the good spots to go for ayahuasca, or certain something that you really want to know, that you can trust this person. Would travel a tour. What are they called? Even in English, kind of a travel guide.
Tour guide, or yeah.
Yeah, un guía de turismo, por ejemplo, para buscar unos hogares que son más seguros para tener la experiencia con ayahuasca. Entonces, la mayoría de las veces es combinar sus intereses con las oportunidades. So it's combining your interests with the opportunities that are out there. And so you're kind of always on the lookout. Entonces, siempre estás buscando las oportunidades, y yo creo que es sentir también lo que se interesa. But you have to kind of feel what interests you and be on the lookout for what are the opportunities. I think that'll be fun. Maybe we'll brainstorm some more ideas with the team and maybe do a special something on that. This is a part of a bigger vision in helping people in the business of herbalism so that they can do what they love. Entonces, este es parte de una gran visión de ayudarlas a las personas buscar o crear los negocios, las oportunidades en herbalismo, y vamos a discutir con el equipo sobre esto también para descubrir más ideas sobre esto también, porque es parte de un gran visión por el Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism para ayudar a las personas a ver crear is to believe, crear is to create, y crear las oportunidades también. Entonces, síguenos para descubrir más con nosotros. So follow us, please. We're keeping on growing here with the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism. We're working on this business part of herbalism and to help you discover your path along the way. So, Alberto, thank you so much for sharing your journey. And I know you're still on it, and but we all are, until we're dead, right? And then then we're on another journey. Entonces, gracias, Alberto, para decirnos tu camino hasta ahora. And yeah, it's very interesting, and look forward to hearing more.
Pues gracias por preguntar. Thank you for asking. It was great.
Thank you, everybody. Oh, and before I forget, make sure to like, subscribe. Tell us in the comments where you're at in the journey. Maybe what are your questions? What struggles are you going through and are looking for answers? And that will help us to help to guide where we go with these interviews next as well. Entonces, por favor, like, subscribe, y también déjanos una nota en los comentarios diciendo cuáles son sus preguntas, dificultades, dónde estás en su camino, cuáles son tus preguntas, y vamos a tratar de ayudar a ustedes con más entrevistas y también en los comentarios.
Sí, muchas gracias. Nos vemos la próxima vez.
Hasta la próxima vez. Adiós.
Chao.